Imagine being locked inside a small prison cell for 27 years. No freedom, no family dinners, no sunlight without permission. Most people would come out angry, broken, seeking revenge. But this man walked out smiling and changed an entire nation. This is the true story of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918 in a small village in South Africa. At that time, the country was controlled by a brutal system known as apartheid, a rigid regime of racial segregation in which black citizens were denied fundamental rights afforded to their white counterparts. Black South Africans could not vote. They could not live where they chose. They could not attend the same schools. The law itself was an instrument of oppression. Mandela grew up witnessing injustice at every turn. Yet rather than succumbing to it, he made a defining choice. He would fight it. As a young lawyer in Johannesburg, Mandela dedicated himself to defending black citizens who were treated unjustly under the law. He joined the African National Congress, the ANC, and helped organize peaceful protests against the regime. The government's response was swift and violent. Peaceful protesters were shot, leaders were arrested. The apparatus of the state was turned against its own people. Mandela came to a painful realization. Freedom would not come easily. He went underground. He began organizing resistance. In return, the government branded him a terrorist. In 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested. After a protracted trial that drew international scrutiny, he was sentenced to life in prison and transferred to Robben Island, a forbidding institution surrounded by the cold waters of the Atlantic. His cell was barely large enough to lie down in. A thin mat on the stone floor, a small bucket. Each day he was forced to break limestone in a quarry under the harsh South African sun. Letters from family were heavily censored. Visits were permitted only a few times a year. Years passed, then decades. Many believed he would die within those walls. But something extraordinary was taking shape inside that prison. Rather than allowing bitterness to consume him, Mandela studied. He reflected. He forgave. He understood something that would come to define his legacy. Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies. Beyond the prison walls, the world began to stir. Free Nelson Mandela became a global rallying cry, carried by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens across every continent. Activists took to the streets. Governments imposed economic sanctions on South Africa. The pressure mounted with each passing year. The apartheid government, confronting international isolation and internal unrest, could no longer afford to silence the man they had imprisoned. History was turning. In 1990, after 27 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela walked free. The world watched live on television as he stepped through the prison gates, raised his fist in the air, and smiled. South Africa stood on the precipice of civil war. A nation fractured by decades of racial violence and institutional hatred held its breath. People expected fury. They braced for retribution. Instead, Mandela shocked the world. He did not call for revenge. He called for peace. He invited his former enemies to the negotiation table, and the nation exhaled. In 1994, South Africa held its first truly democratic election. For the first time in the nation's history, black citizens were permitted to vote. Millions stood in line for hours, some for the very first time in their lives. The man who had been called a terrorist was elected the first black president of South Africa. The symbolism was historic. The responsibility was immense. Mandela governed with the same spirit that had sustained him through 27 years of captivity. He forgave his former prison guards. He championed unity between races. He chose healing over hatred and reconciliation over retribution. Nelson Mandela proved something powerful to the world. True strength is not revenge. True power is forgiveness. He lost 27 years of his own freedom, and in doing so gave millions of others theirs. Your circumstances do not define you. Your response does. You can let pain turn you bitter, or you can let it make you better. Nelson Mandela chose greatness, and because of that, the world will never forget his name. And Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Augusti debit siddi Yotoban kun iyo sagal bokol iyo siddi Yotoban ila shanta December laba kun iyo sa Dex Yotoban.